Thank you. I'm very humbled by the fact that everyone is here and so many of you are giving up your evening to come and listen to me. I know that a lot of you probably have questions, and many of those questions might be very relevant to what's happening on the political and economic scene in South Africa. I'm very happy to take any questions. No holy cows. I will answer anything, and some of it might be termed inconvenient truth. But that's not really the main focus of the talk. The main focus of the talk is to tell you a little bit about my background, where I come from, and a little bit of a history and why I am where I am today. And really it all started in Poland. I was born in Poland in the midst of Polish communism and Russian version of communism, which basically meant everyone had the same. I mean, it's a little bit of an Animal Farm for those of you that read the book. So certainly there was the Communist Party and they had everything, and then there was everyone else who had exactly the same. So we all lived in exactly the same apartments, about 30 square meters. Everyone had a job. There was no unemployment whatsoever. But because everyone had a job, no one had to work that hard. So, the working hours were between 9 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You had to wait, put your name on a list to get a car, and there were these little Fiat cars that seated maybe, 3 people really, but a family of 8 would pack themselves in if they needed to. And you didn't know any better. There was full blockage on TV of any Western media. So no one in Poland really was allowed to know that, under capitalist type system, people had more. And everyone was kind of fairly happy with that system. There were some benefits to it. Free healthcare, free education of a very high standard, particularly as far as maths and sciences were concerned. And everyone was employed. And there were basics in the shop. However, at the same time, what was happening on the economic front in Poland was that Russia, as the big brother, was stripping out all resources that Poland produced. And Poland doesn't really have that much. It had coal and agricultural products. And as all systems or political systems go, where you start providing things to the masses for free, eventually you start running out of money. And that is what happened to communism in that form. The money ran out. Foreign loans and foreign aid ran out. And it translated itself into complete shortage of food. And initially it's just, the luxuries disappeared, if there were ever luxuries. I remember nachos and Nutella only appeared in the shops once a year at Christmas. And ham. Ham was a big thing. Christmas and Easter were big celebrations. And then the basics started disappearing. When the basic foodstuffs started disappearing, everyone started getting issued with postage stamps. And those postage stamps literally entitled you to, they were like postage stamps. And it would read 1 kilogram of sugar, and you would be entitled to 5 kilograms of sugar a month. So you got 5 postage stamps per member of family. But you can't really eat postage stamps, because just because you got the postage stamps once a month didn't mean that sugar or meat appeared in the shops miraculously. So literally overnight, Poland went bankrupt, and literally overnight, people started queuing for food, and those queues would be, 48-hour queues outside empty shops, hoping that something gets delivered, anything, and you could eat. And a similar situation played itself out across the Eastern Bloc. Poland wasn't unique. Czechoslovakia, when it was still Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Ukraine, all suffered from exactly the same situation. And in that period of, very early 1980s, when all of this started playing itself out, about 3.5 million people, Eastern Europeans, escaped to the West. And it truly was an escape, because the communists weren't that stupid. I mean, they had to keep you captive in some way. So we didn't have passports. We had ID cards, which wouldn't allow you to travel. If you wanted to go to the West, you needed a special permission and a passport that was issued to you on a temporary basis, and you always had to leave a hostage behind. So if there was a family of, with 2 children, 1 child had to stay behind. You would never get 4 passports. You would get 3 passports to ensure that you came back. So in that environment, people started making economic decisions rather than political refugee decisions, if that makes sense. So these 3.5 million people escaped not because of politics or disagreeing with communism, they escaped poverty and hunger. And interestingly, after World War II, there were 3 countries, the aggressors in World War II, who signed this very weird clause in the Geneva Convention, which basically meant that they had to offer refuge to political refugees from previously occupied territories. And those 3 countries were Italy, Austria, and Germany. And they were funded by United Nations. They didn't have to pay for those refugees, but they had to offer them refuge. And so, these 3.5 million people were then effectively housed in military barracks, in anything that they could set up as camps, not dissimilar to what you're seeing in Syrian situation. I'll talk about the barracks we ended up in, but my parents happened to be, remember now, everyone in communism has a job, and everyone is paid exactly the same salary. So people got bored, and hence people overstudied. So my parents were medical doctors and double specialists. They didn't get paid more because they were double specialists. It's just that you kind of got bored with one job, and hence, you studied a bit more and became another specialist. And so they decided that, there really was no future. I have a brother and a sister younger than me, and there was no future for us in Poland, given this shortage of food. And so, we decided to escape and join the 3.5 million refugees. And a lot of effort went into ensuring that on one particular day, all 6 members of our family, so it's 3 children, my grandmother, and my parents, had passports. And a lot of bribery and corruption went into that. And this is before the ages of computers, so we were able to cross the border illegally in 2 different places at the same time. And we regrouped in Austria the following morning in a refugee camp, which was a military barracks outside of Vienna. And that was, the memory I have of that is twofold. The toilets were unusable. You could swim in order to get inside. And the second one is the guy that had the bunk bed above me walked from the Ukraine, literally walked. And so his feet were rotten from gangrene. And, once you landed up in these camps, you weren't allowed outside. You now applied for asylum, which you got. And then you applied for immigration to countries which officially were accepting immigrants. So unsurprisingly, that's New Zealand, Australia, United States, and Canada. And you waited. And, your typical stay in a camp was between, 9 months to a year before one of those countries would process your paperwork and decide that they wanted your skills or not. And so we spent about 9 months in the camp. And at that stage, South Africa, interestingly, National Party here, realized that in these refugee camps, they had access to engineers, to architects, to medical doctors. And so they arrived, actually, the South African military arrived in Vienna, opened up the South African embassy, put up posters in the camp and said, we're looking for cooks for the army, for musicians for the army. I never figured that one out. Never. To this day, I don't understand. Medical doctors, we're looking for engineers, we're looking for architects. And so my parents, not knowing anything about South Africa, literally it was a black box, applied, and, we went for this interview. I still remember the interview, and it was one of these, old-style South African generals who interviewed us, and literally his only question was, were you members of the Communist Party? Now, in Poland, the truth of the matter was about 5% of the population belonged to the Communist Party and were the devils, and 95% were Roman Catholic. The two didn't mix. So it was easy to say no, and in fact my father was Jewish, so he definitely did not belong to the Communist Party. And so, the next thing is we found ourselves on an SAA flight to Johannesburg. And of course, we didn't speak any English, and we literally knew nothing about South Africa, other than the fact that my parents had jobs, and that was the determining factor. If we went to United States or Canada, they would dig ditches. Coming to South Africa, at least they walked into medical jobs. They were very restricted. They were only allowed to work in public service. And my mother, who is a double specialist and worked as a double specialist and treated some of the ministers, after 20 years service, retired on a salary of 120,000 per annum because their registration was limited to working in public service. They were never allowed to work in private service. So it was literally imported labor. And we landed up in this unpronounceable suburb of Voortrekkerhoogte. So you can imagine, like, flipping hell, if you're going to get exposed to one word, and this is your first word of foreign language, does it really have to be this? And the very next thing that we got exposed to is my grandmother in tears. And that was because someone said goeiemorgen to her. Now, so inconveniently, goeie in Polish means a dick. So okay, once we dealt with the grandmother, we got housed in a nursing hostel in a military barracks. And, that's how we started our little, adventure in South Africa, literally not knowing anything else. And those first few years were really tough. I mean, I was 13 when we arrived here, so I got shoved into a school, Pretoria High School for girls. And, being in an all-girls school among teenage girls, and you're coming from Eastern Europe, you have absolutely no money. I mean, we arrived here with 500 rand in the bank account and 3 suitcases. There's nothing more cruel than a teenage girl flipping hell. They'll eat you alive. So those were really tough times, of trying to learn English, trying to learn Afrikaans. The only thing I really shone at was science and maths. And that's thanks to the Polish education, where, the mathematics and sciences were very strong. And I didn't have to talk. And so, I remember a few years back, I was asked to come and do a valedictory service speech at Pretoria Girls High. And, I had the speech, obviously, a little bit of an inspirational speech to the girls, but, I had 2 openings to that speech. And one was the obvious one, I am what I am because of the school, thank you so much. And the other one was, these were the most horrible years of my life. And up until I stood on that stage, I didn't quite know which one I was going to go with. And then when I stood up there, I went with these were the most horrible years of my life. Needless to say, I wasn't asked back, ever. That was it, as far as being a guest speaker at Pretoria Girls High. But nonetheless, tough years, for all of us. And a number of Polish families arrived, number of Polish families with children of similar age to me and my siblings. And, we all had similar experiences. And, I think those experiences kind of robbed us of childhood in many ways. It was a very non-linear childhood because you had to become an adult very quickly because our parents were so self-involved in trying to survive, rebuild a life. We then rented a flat in Sunnyside. I mean, they had to buy every fork. I mean, they were in their 40s, every fork, every spoon out of meager salaries they were paid. That there wasn't a lot of attention paid to us. So we kind of had to bring ourselves up ourselves. And the one thing that my parents always said to me is, look, we've given you an opportunity. By arriving in South Africa, we've given you an opportunity. We cannot give you money. We cannot give you an education. We can't pay for your university. So when it comes to when it came to choosing of the courses of study I would follow, it really was a commercial decision. I basically had to scan the environment and go, is there any course which pays for everything? And I stumbled upon this thing called actuarial science, and I had no clue. Absolutely no clue. Insurance didn't exist in Poland. And my parents couldn't help me. But, God damn it, they offered full scholarships for everything. So, I got one of those scholarships, or bursaries, from a company called Southern Life, and it doesn't exist any longer. The first thing I had to do is I figured out that I could take the meal vouchers and go back to the admin department and trade them for cash. And I needed the cash because I had no cash. So that's how I became a vegetarian, because the only food that was available for free without the meal vouchers was toast and coffee. So for my 4 years at UCT, I ate toast and coffee. But I traded the vouchers for, and I wish I could say I spent them on something meaningful, but no, I actually spent them on clothes. So I studied actuarial science. Again, maths and science were very useful, in that kind of environment. And it's not that I'm a mathematical genius, because frankly, when I walked into that actuarial science class, the professor of actuarial science kind of came in and he said, look to your left and look to your right, and only one of you is going to graduate, which turned out to be an overstatement, because very few people actually carried on. But there were some very, very bright people. I mean, I think, the guy next to me was kind of a South African chess master. The guy on the left has figured out how to win on horses and got chased out of the country by the mafia because he won too much money on those horses at Kenilworth racehorse course. But I had one good thing that I inherited, and that is propensity for hard work. And that I inherited from my mother's side of the family, who were peasants, and they worked in the fields. And, so I had no problem working hard. And I had few choices. So, it literally was, I couldn't lose that bursary. And so anyway, I finished studying actuarial science. I still had to do board exams. I started working at Southern Life. And again, I figured out that I'm hardly the brightest person in that actuarial science department, because there were people who actually knew how to use computers, whereas I was kind of going, which button do I press? And then I kind of scanned the environment and thought, well, which department looks most interesting? And there was one department which they had carpets with thick pile. The rest of Southern Life was all like this kind of carpeting, but there was one department where they actually had thick piled carpets. So I thought, okay, whatever these guys are doing, I want to be there. So the office space looked much better. And that turned out to be the investment department of Southern Life. They had no money to manage because they were going bankrupt very quick. They were, but for a variety of reasons. But I managed to angle my way into the investments department. And, they didn't quite know what to do with me, but at that stage, Southern Life was willing to try anything as far as investments was concerned. And so they thought they will start the first index tracking fund or passively managed fund in South Africa. So that's where you don't make, subjective decisions on the back of is Anglo's going to outperform Billiton or Prime Media. You effectively just buy whatever the JSE calculates and includes in the index. And so they turned to me and they said, well, you've got a mathematical background, you do it. At that stage, I had like 6 months work experience, didn't know what an equity or a bond was, but I designed an index tracking fund and ran it. Scary thought. And then I scanned the environment. I mean, there was a lot of scanning of environment concerned. And there was a company at that stage which was employing, kind of the brightest actuaries. And, it had two, quite visionary CEOs who subsequently got kind of involved in a whole lot of financial scandals. But at that stage, they were visionary. And that was Alexander Forbes. Alexander Forbes emerged out of Sanlam, and it had these two actuaries at the top, and literally they were visionary. And the whole kind of mantra was, we are the best. Not we aim to be the best, we strive to be the best. It was literally, we are the best. And so I just happened to be at this dinner, sitting next to one of the CEOs, and I couldn't waste a good opportunity. So I recruited myself over dinner, and I joined Alexander Forbes. And they didn't quite know what to do with me. But I had this investment background, and they had this idea that they could maybe start offering investment consulting advice. They weren't doing it at that stage. They were just administering pension funds and offering general advice. But they had all these clients like BP and Shell and some of the largest South African corporates as clients. And so they thought, investment consulting, another service that you can flog. And they turned to me and said, again, develop something. We don't care what it is. So I developed something which involved some reporting and some consulting on which companies to appoint and which asset managers to appoint. I mean, I had no clue. But I could sell. So, they very quickly wheeled me out in front of some clients. And, at the age of 25, I was advising Shell and BP on how to invest their billions, which is a very scary concept. Trust me, it's a lot more scary than running that index tracking fund. And, I spent about 1.5 years at Alexander Forbes. And it was very much kind of, you ate what you hunted. Because I was, alone in Cape Town, in the Cape Town office, responsible for Cape Town and the coastal region up to Durban. And had to survive and justify my existence there. But that was an interesting time in South African kind of financial services history, because there were a lot of small companies starting up, which are today giants. So there was, Coronation started up. This is all early 90s, mid 90s. Coronation, Investec Asset Management. Investment Bank started, and then they started an asset management division with 5 people in it. There was a company, some of you might remember, many want BOE Asset Management started up. Ellen Gray started in the 80s, lost all their clients. They were down to 1 client. They were the quintessential boutique asset manager, but they really stuffed up. I mean, they lost all the money for all the clients, so literally they were a startup again. And at the same time, all the money was being managed by dinosaurs, the old mutuals, the Sanlams, the Liberties, Momentums. And Alexander Forbes, as a bit of a pioneer, started this move of moving assets away from life insurance companies to these boutique asset managers. That really was the reason for being and for giving advice. And so, one day I was in this unique position of now advising on whether to appoint Coronation or Investec. And so everyone was whining and dining me, 25. They were offering me jobs. So, I had this lunch with Coronation, which was, and the reason the lunch happened is because they were so bad at marketing. At a time when companies were importing Proximas, so those projectors that we now take for granted. When I started in this industry, we were still living with, those Proximas, I can't even remember, transparencies, remember transparencies? And you would handwrite your marketing slides on a transparency, and that's what a marketing presentation looked like. And Coronation was just the bottom of the bottom. And so I called them in and I said to them, listen, guys, you're embarrassing me. At least like Investec has invested in a Proxima and into two male models, because, by the way, everything I know about marketing I learned from Investec in those early days. So Investec was led by Hendrik de Tooy. He's still the CEO of Investec Asset Management today. And he figured out that people bought investments because they saw wealth. They didn't invest with people who looked poor, they invested with people who looked wealthy. And so they hired 2 male models, literally, very good looking guys, black hair and white hair, bought them 2 black Porsches, dressed them in Hugo Boss suits, double-cuffed shirts, silk ties, and sent them off with a Proxima. And they won all the mandates. Their performance was terrible, but it didn't matter. Everyone gave them money. And here was Coronation coming in with handwritten transparencies. So I called these guys in and I said, look, you complete losers, I'm not inviting you in again because you're embarrassing me. And on the back of that, they then called me in and they asked me for lunch and they said, won't I join them? And I think I was employee number 14 or 15 at Coronation at that stage. And here was the first life lesson. I took over. They had a CEO who served his purpose for the first 3 years, and then they kind of pushed him out. And one of the investment guys took over as the CEO of Coronation. And, I joined on the same day as he was promoted. And he said to me, look, he comes from investments. He's only interested in investment side and the financial side because, he's going to count the money. And he doesn't want to know about anything else. Everything else, as far as asset management is concerned, is dirty business. So admin, performances, survey submissions, marketing, products, they don't care. I must take care of all of that and just not bother them with that. And I did. I was always very happy to put up my hand to do things that no one else wanted to do, which basically meant that, a couple of years later, you did all the dirty jobs. My first office wasn't an office, it was a cupboard, and I sat on a box. But I got involved in absolutely everything, from the administration division of Sri to, launching products. I remember launching Coronation Life. I wrote to the FSB. I said, I need a life insurance company. Could you give me one? And they wrote me back and they said, yes. Can you just pay a fee? And no one cared. I launched all these products. And again, these guys just did their thing. They managed money. But what it meant is that, 2 years down the line, when it came to sitting in a boardroom, I was an expert on absolutely everything in that company other than investments, which was an amazing, I call it my Wild West days. But, by the age of 30, I knew everything about every aspect of a company other than actually investments. And then Coronation grew. It grew from nothing to about 60 odd billion in assets. And I headed up the institutional business and the part of the business that dealt with big pension funds. and the administration and the performance and the legal department. In fact, I was the legal department and I was the marketing department. And they were very schnoop, so they weren't going to spend money on things they didn't need to. But I learned heck of a lot. And then Coronation went through its own traumas. I mean, it's they listed and, without going into long, and there are stories attached to it, but I decided to leave and start my own company. And, I was 32. And, the one lesson from that was that as much as I thought I knew a lot, I discovered that I didn't. That there were big gaps in my knowledge, so the bit where, what is finance, what is a balance sheet, what is an income statement, how do you actually run the financial side of a company, I knew nothing about. I knew everything about the legal side, the admin side, the ops side, the marketing side, nothing about the financial side. And so we started this business. Some people followed me from Coronation, willing to work for me for free. But, the stress of it was, quite high. And, when you start a business, a lot of people approach you because they're interested in what you're doing and they're trying to find an angle as to whether, you could be useful for free. And, that coincided with a person that I have greatest respect for. And he's a controversial character in South African history, and certainly in South African empowerment history, and that is a man by the name of Mzi Khumalo. He spent 13 years on Robben Island. He was right there with Mandela. He was trained in Russian army, and he was Umkhonto we Sizwe. And the only one guy you didn't mess with, I've been told subsequently, on Robben Island was Mzi. But Mzi used his time on Robben Island to study economics through UNISA. And he came off Robben Island saying, I'm going to make money. And he did the very first BE deal in South Africa, where he was lent money and he got shares in Harmony Gold Mine. And here is this very interesting side of it. Everyone, the white corporate South Africa underestimated Mzi Khumalo. So they concluded this agreement with him. He got the shares in Harmony at a discount, and he wasn't allowed to, for whatever period of time, I think 5 years, he wasn't allowed to sell those shares. And he didn't. What they forgot to put in is a very sophisticated financial transaction, which involves shorting the shares, which isn't technically selling them. And so, I'm not going to go into the details of shorting as a strategy, as an investment strategy, but he used his shares and he shorted them. And he made money from the fact that the share price dropped. And he made R1 billion in a space of 6 months. And that is not what was supposed to happen in BE deals. This is not how this was going to work out for white corporate South Africa. There wasn't going to be a black man who appeared and made R1 billion overnight. And a lot of his reputational issues come from that, from the fact that he actually was brighter. Anyway, he made the money and he was bright at that. But then he got, he wasn't very bright at what he did with the money. I mean, some of it he spent, but some of it he spent on buying a company which actually emerged, interestingly enough, out of the Coronation stable, not out of Coronation fund managers, but out of the parent company called African Harvest. And it was an empowerment company through which the founders of original Coronation washed all their dirt through. So no taxes were paid, no systems, no admin. I mean, it was just a complete joke. And in fact, they were in the process of closing it down. There was a guy there who realized that he's going to be out on his butt with no job, and he needed to find someone to buy this company from Coronation while they were busy closing down shop. And he encountered Mzi, and he promised Mzi that this company is just the next Coronation fund managers. It's going to make millions. Meanwhile, it was losing everything and, it was bankrupt. Anyway, Mzi bought it for 300 million rand and sent in auditors to do a due diligence of that company after he bought it. He sent in attorneys at law, who then produced a report that thick, titled Culture of Greed, Corruption, Entitlement, I think. And then he had to find a sucker to run this company. And obviously there weren't any volunteers, certainly not in Business South Africa, who knew exactly what this company was. So he needed a real sucker. So here I was, 32 years old, started this company, which, and with all these people who were working for me for free and all the stress. So never accept people who want to work for you for free. The stress that brings with it is just not worth it. Anyway, I got asked to this lunch. And I met Mzi, and his opening words to me were, well, Magda, you've got a business, I've got a business, let's make a deal. I didn't really have a business, I had an office. He, I thought, had a business, as it turned out, not so much. And so we did a bit of, sale of shares and swapping of shares, and I landed up heading up African Harvest. And so the first day I walked into African Harvest, there was an envelope on my desk, and that was the due diligence report. And I opened this horror show, and I phoned Mzi, and I said, Mzi, what the hell is this? And he says, Magda, it's not that I didn't tell you the truth, it's just that you really didn't ask the right questions. But, I was never scared of hard work, so I threw myself at this. And this really completed my business education, because I had to deal with tax fraud, with structured things which shouldn't have existed, with penalties from here till Timbuktu, with financial mismanagement, with stuff stolen, with leases signed for 20 years on printers that didn't work. So, all these things that I was missing in my kind of business education, I learned at African Harvest. And 3 years down, and it was a bit of this swan situation because, on the surface, we were marketing the largest black-owned asset management company while, underneath I was peddling like hell. But anyway, we cleaned up that business, and 3 years later, we grew the assets from, I think it was 8 billion when we started, to 35 billion. I even managed to get Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund as a client. And trust me, that was a dress-up show because, how do you get a client? Well, you need to figure out what they're all about. And, Abu Dhabi guys dealing with a woman, not an obvious. But on that day, I went off, I shopped for relevant clothing, there was no makeup, the hair was all tied back, there was, And anyway, we won a big portion of the South African appointment. And the day that was announced, Mzi called me and he said, Magda, sell the company. I've made my 300 million rand back. I want my money. I'm bailing. And so, that taught me about corporate dealing. And because I had to sell this company, I had to find buyers. I found out that, if there are anyone here who works as a corporate advisor, waste of money, guys. Don't ever pay for corporate advice work. Really. I swear to God, waste of money. Anyway, we eventually ended up in a situation, it was another fantastic lesson for all the ladies in the room. Never underestimate male stupidity when it comes to women. And use it. So the company that eventually made the winning bid for African Harvest was a company called Cadiz, Financial Services. And Cadiz was run by a bunch of males, actually Zimbabwe, so at least it's not South African guys. So, I can be ruder. And, they could not fathom. They really wanted this asset. They really wanted this African Harvest Fund managers. This was going to be their future. But they couldn't understand how, in order to get that asset, they actually had to go through a woman. It was just not in the lexicon to deal with a woman in a boardroom. And so, those negotiations would start with, they would have like a tag team of 5 of them and 1 of me. They threatened my lawyers into withdrawing all their business and never ever giving them any business. I'm not going to name the firm. It's one of the big ones. So they didn't pitch up to negotiate. They sent some junior guy. So that was, But I figured out that these guys were so busy screaming at me as a woman, they weren't paying attention to what they were signing. So then I thought, okay, well, if that is annoying them, it's really going to annoy them if I put my hair in ponytails and kind of wear boots and a short skirt, because that if I wore a suit, possibly maybe I could lower down the temperature, but it didn't really work because the temperature worked for me because they were just signing wildly while screaming at me. So eventually it was a corporate deal, and I believe it's one of the very, very few corporate deals concluded in South African history where the tender price that they tendered, they paid. And they literally paid down to the last cent of what they pitched. And they didn't even have shareholder approvals to pay that price. That was just the opening gambit to get rid of other bidders. And they ended up paying that price. And I still remember the CEO of that business in what stage, banging the boardroom table, screaming at me, Magda, I'm not as stupid as I sound. I was going, okay. But while we were going through the transaction, half of African Harvest, well, not half, about 6 or 7 people. I mean, look, there wasn't a big company. There were only 30 of us. So I talk about it as half the company, but not quite half the company. But my chief operating officer, who's still with Sygnia today, came to me and said to me, okay, Magda, what are we all doing next? And I said to her, who is we? And she said, no, I've got a list. I've got a list of people who are not going to Cadiz, who are coming with you, and we don't care what you're doing, but we're doing that. So we had, I wasn't actually planning to do much, but, that kind of forced me to reposition the deal a little bit, buy out some companies from the African Harvest Group, and literally the 7 of us. And here I'm excluding the deaf cleaning lady and the receptionist, and, but the core people, there were, I think, 7 of us. And we bought out these companies, we rented offices at the waterfront in Cape Town, and we sat around the boardroom table, stared at each other and said, okay, well, what are we all going to do next? We have some licenses, but no clients and no business model. And we basically looked at the South African financial services industry and we said, you know what? It's actually really tough to start a small business with nothing and no capital. And no backers of any sort, and no investors giving you millions. So how do you do it? If you try to copy what other people are doing, there will always be someone who's got more cash, who is ahead of you in the game, who is bigger than you, who's got a brand, who's got a reputation. So we can't do what other people do. We in financial services, that's all we know. So we need to operate in our sphere of expertise, but we need to do something radically different. So we looked at this landscape and said, what is different? What can we do in financial services that's completely different, that no one is doing? Turns out that fee disclosure was one. Low fees was another. Transparency was another. None of those concepts were well known, in financial services. It was an industry which to this day operates on jargon, and the jargon is there to confuse. And the jargon is there to hide the fees. That's why it's all made to sound so complex. So we said, okay, well, we're going to do things differently. We're going to disclose all the fees. We're going to speak in English, which we do to this day. We're going to simplify everything that we do. And, we had a very kind of good appreciation of where technology was heading. So already at African Harvest, I was involved in developing systems. We wanted to have kind of the best and that comes from my, kind of administration background, Coronation. We wanted to have the best systems and the best technology. So we hired some guys who could design, and we basically gave them carte blanche. We said, you know what, you are bright, develop the best systems you can. We don't care, we're not going to spec. We're not going to spend hours specking what you need to design. We want something that works, and we only have 1 month. So just do it. And it's amazing when you compress the timelines and don't impose too many restrictions on people, and you have bright people working for you. And so we started building administration systems that no one else had. And with that proposition, we then looked again at the financial services industry, and we said, where is the segment of the market where there is least competition? Although my background was asset management, when I looked at the asset management, there were plenty of asset managers. Loads of boutiques have started up since Coronation and Allen Gray and Investec. So why push yourself into terrain where you've got 100 other players? Rather look at the segment of the market where there are few players, and you can stand out. And so we discovered this whole kind of world of multi-management. So that's where you build investment products, but you appoint third-party managers and you kind of blend them together, and you do your research of those managers and you sell these pre-packaged solutions. And really, there were kind of 2 players in that field. Momentum was one, and Alexander Forbes Investment Solutions was another. So perfect. You've got 2 competitors. We can stand out. What are they doing or what are they not doing? Well, they're not disclosing fees. They're hiding fees in tiers. They're selling, pre-packaged products, and all these products look the same. So let's change that. Let's expose all the fees, anomaly in financial services. Let's be simple about what we do, and let's offer people choice. Let's customize things. Let's not say, you all fit into these 5 boxes, so choose your box. We will customize things. And because we had the technology, we could customize strategies and we could come out with that proposition. And actually, the first appeal of what we were offering was not in the products. I hate to say no one wanted our investment expertise, but people wanted our systems. And very quickly we got appointed by 2 very large anchor clients who remain anchor clients of Sygnia's today. One was Absa Group Pension Fund, which basically said to us, look, we've got our own investment experts. We don't want your investment expertise. We want what you can do on the administration side. We've got this giant fund and it's a mess. Can you please sort it out and run it for us? And another turned out to be a United States-based multi-manager company who also needed systems. They scanned the world. They couldn't find systems like we had. And they ended up, they're a Nasdaq-listed company, one of the world's largest multi-manager companies, and they outsourced that administration to Cape Town, South Africa, which obviously wasn't an obvious for an American company to do, particularly that there were like 7 of us in the room. And our server room was just underneath the bathroom, which was told was a disaster because if there was a water leakage, all of IT and systems would go. So this is a disaster recovery situation. But anyway, they didn't look too closely, thank God. They didn't do inspection of offices above the server room. And that kind of gave us a bit of a foothold into financial services. And we went from there. And we continued on that path of never look at what competitors do, never imitate, never. Don't look at what they do, because the moment you look at what your competition does, it constrains your own thinking. Rather start with a whiteboard and design things, services or products that make sense to you, that make sense to your community, that make sense to your potential customers, that make sense to your family. Speak to the layman about what they want. You would be surprised. You would be so surprised what you hear. The moment you look at what competition does, you start thinking, well, how can I do what they do? So we never looked at what competition did, ever. Not in the systems design, not in the services that we offer. We always stuck to our core principles. Speak in English, don't use jargon. Make things simple. Your customers are not financial experts. Speak in English, in simple language. Educate people, empower people to make choices and to make right choices. Make things financially accessible. Don't try and hide fees. It's turned out to be a really good strategy in the current political environment, because I've now moved into this kind of inadvertently political spectrum. And the state security has been all over my background to obviously try and find propaganda or any dirt or anything that they can find to discredit me with. And the only thing that they have stumbled upon so far is that I basically said we should retire Zuma, pay him off and retire him. That's it. And trust me, if they had found anything else, they would have used it. So I'm quite proud of the fact that the only thing that they found in my background is amnesty deal for Zuma. And then, we moved from offering things to retirement funds, from administration, investment products with this transparency, customization, and low cost, to moving into the individual savings market. And again, we looked at the individual savings market. And that's where the biggest ripoff happens. These unit trusts priced at 1.5% plus performance fees, which then turns inadvertently into 3.5%. Into savings products and tiers of fees, into financial services companies, big ones, which on their website will show you a fee of 0.5%. What you don't know is that there are 3 pages showing 0.5%, and you think it's one fee. Actually, it's 3 different fees. So the total fee you pay is 1.5%, not 0.5%. And then I also went back to my basics, right to the beginning of Southern Life, and the cheapest form of investing was index tracking. And we started offering index tracking, both to retirement funds and to individual investors. And so we started launching savings products for individuals at 0.4% per annum, including VAT. So you can buy a retirement annuity and a unit trust at 0.4% per annum. Not that 0.4% per annum was a magic number, by the way. And the first few clients we lost money on. But that wasn't the point. The point was that we didn't believe that any financial services company in South Africa would come down to that level. Not that Old Mutual couldn't tomorrow launch a unit trust at 0.4% per annum. Of course they could. So could Coronation and Ellen Gray. But if they do, the very first thing that's going to happen is the existing clients are going to switch into the cheaper products. So they're never going to come down to these fee levels. So, that that has been this kind of innovation and disruption. And so we became disruptors before the word disruption was known. And then we launched subsequent products, umbrella fund space for retirement funds. Again, it's a bit technical, but when we launched the umbrella fund, we launched it with best technology that we could develop, 70% cheaper than Alexander Forbes was offering. And then, a few years down the line, Sygnia, when we entered this retail market, we really didn't have the budgets. If you actually think that someone like Ellen Gray spends 180 million rand a year on advertising, so all that haunting music that makes you believe that they don't really invest in Net One, they are really good guys. It costs money, big money, and we didn't have that money. So, if you want to start advertising, what do you do if you don't have money? How do you actually make your brand known? So you've got to use clever strategies. So one clever strategy is to use PR, use the media by writing articles, giving quality content to the media to publish. So that's what we did. We wrote a lot of articles and released a lot of articles, educational articles. Now it has become a little bit political, but educational articles. So use free PR where you can use PR. And then still that's not enough. I mean, that's not going to get you from not being known at all to having some kind of a brand name. So then we struck on the strategy of, if you're a listed company, you get endless opportunities for PR because everyone wants to know about your results and your strategies and what you do, and people write about you. So that was the main decision behind the listing of Sygnia on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, was not to raise capital, which we didn't actually need. At that stage, it was actually to get brand awareness among consumers out there. So we listed on the JSE. We did and there was a bit of hype around the listing. That was before we had this whole equity strike that is going on in recession right now. So that lifted us and the awareness of Sygnia in people's minds. And really, we are we on this path of saying the advantage of being an innovator. And not someone who imitates, is the fact that you don't have to fight others for market share. What you're looking to do is you're looking to take their clients away from them by offering something different. So, right now we're living through very uninteresting economic and political times, and they're intertwined in South Africa. But the Sygnia story is not one which depends on the South African economy growing, because we unashamedly talk about the fact that we are targeting the large companies and we're targeting their client base. And we're targeting their clients, and we want to take their clients away by offering better, cheaper products. And that's a much easier way of growing than relying on the economy to grow in order to acquire a client base by offering exactly the same products as everyone else is offering. So that's really the Sygnia story. I think we've only just begun. I think on a footnote, the one thing that I'm very deeply kind of immersed in and a huge firm believer in is that, the game changer for all of us here is technology. You need to learn about the technologies. We need to, living at this tip of Africa, it's quite difficult to find out what's going on in this world of fourth industrial revolution, but you actually can't afford not to. And, I got involved with attending some of the courses run by a bunch of futurists funded by Google and Facebook's and Amazon's, called Singularity University in the US. And they actually run summits in the US, but interestingly enough, they're coming to Johannesburg in September. They're going to run a 2-day or 3-day course on all those innovations. And I know it's 15,000 Rand and it costs a lot of money, but it's completely money well spent. It will give you like a compressed capsule of what the world will look like in the next 5 to 10 years. And it's all about, renewable energy, self-driving cars, where drone technology is heading, where quantum computing is heading, all these things which are concepts floating out there, but we actually have no realization what impact it will have on humanity. And we need to have that realization, because truly it will shape the world going forward. So that's really my story, and this is where I am. We've got, Sygnia, we employ just under 200 people. We have offices in Durban now, in Johannesburg, Cape Town, and we hope to grow by attacking our competition. Unashamedly so.